Doing all right. I am your host, Jamarl Thomas, and you are at the Progressive Soapbox. Let's do the news. And by the way, before we start, if you guys enjoy the content and you dig what I am putting down and you find yourself coming back to this channel often, please consider supporting this content. You can do so either through PayPal or Patreon. They continuously demonetize the videos, especially on issues that I am about to touch on now. And ironically, these are the issues that are probably most important to touch on because of the consequences that they have to real world human beings. We never learn. We never learn. And I don't mean the collective we as in all of humanity. I don't even mean the collective we as each and every person in the United States. One of the myths that's propagated in our society, particularly through media and through political circles, is that we're all united. We are not all united. We do not all have the same objectives or even incentives that push us along. We're not united. Our interests are not the same. Do you honestly believe that a person with $1 billion in the bank has the same interests as you that's barely, making ends meet? They do not. Your world is entirely different. The world that they see and engage in is a fundamentally different world than you engage in. So I don't necessarily talk about this in the collective sense of all of us. I talk about this in the collective sense of the 99% of human beings that just want to live, take care of their family, take care of themselves, and live their life and pursue their aspirations. Not screw with other countries. There's a difference. The objectives of someone who, let's say, sells weapons, or who, let's say, is on Wall Street in this case, and everything at this point becomes just this kind of valuation of whether or not it's profitable or not. Who cares about the human element of this? I'm saying there's a difference between the interests and our own. We never learn, because ultimately there is 99% of us. There is only 1% of them, and even if their interests are somewhat nefarious or somewhat sinister and run counter to the interests of most people on this planet, it's 99 of us. We never learn. On Easter, the sacredness of Easter, if there's sacred anything, was broken and ripped to shreds by the profane. A bomb went off in Sri Lanka, in various places, in churches and hotels, killing upwards of 359 people. That number at this point, maybe more. Ultimately, they didn't necessarily know who was responsible initially for the bomb strike, but at this point, just to give a heads up on it, the explosions blew out the tile roofs of the churches and hotel windows, killing worshippers and hotel guests in the process. You can see pieces of flesh thrown all over the walls in the sanctuary and even outside the church. Father Edmund said, social communications director for Archdiocese of Colombo, told CNN from St. Sebastian's Church, one of the explosion sites. Sri Lanka had been party to a civil war, meaning they've only had a peace in this country for a short period of time. And in some way, this could potentially, or at the very least the people there are praying that it doesn't destabilize a peace that has lasted in the country for the last few years. The explosion itself, you can imagine if you were there, was tremendous. Not to mention there were a few Americans, there were Brits, and of course, the people who live in Sri Lanka. This is footage. It's hard to get across, what that's like. Nevertheless, we have a taker in regards to who's responsible. This is, and I maybe mispronounced the last part of this, Abu Bakr al-Baghdadi. It was suspected that he was dead. They thought, the Americans and the Russians thought they had killed him. He's an ISIS leader. In fact, apparently a rather competent one. He's apparently gotten older, put on a little bit more weight, as the news people said. But of course he's gotten older because everybody gets older at every moment. Who is this guy? This guy is the leader of ISIS. Now here's the catch. Here's the catch. Information came out in a book written by a gentleman named Maxime Chai, and I could be pronouncing his name wrong. He's French. He's a French author. And he tells this story using documentation and evidence showing that it is 100% that the United States CIA was working with Western intelligence services in addition to Middle Eastern intelligence services to ferret weapons, munitions, and resources into the Middle East for the sake of taking down the Syrian government. And not just for the sake of taking down the Syrian government. You must understand, part of the reason that they were funneling weapons using MI6 was to avoid Congress. Obama comes out with Timber Sycamore on June 2013. The reality of it is, though, that they were supporting, training, and funneling resources, the CIA, into Syria and into the Middle East for the sake of taking down the Assad government, giving weapons and munitions to essentially a motley crew of Syrian forces that are hell-bent on taking down Assad. Now, the optics of this were, non-lethal resources and moderate rebels. Fact of the matter is, what he shows is that the moderate rebel stuff was a staging ground, or essentially a cauldron where ISIS and Al-Qaeda can pull from these forces in order to support their own forces. In fact, Ben Rhodes, the one that works with Obama, admitted that Al-Qaeda or ISIS was, or let's say al-Nusra, was one of the strongest fighting forces. These guys are terrorists against Assad, and that any notion that Trump is kind of pulling weapons or something away from them is adversely affecting some of the best fighters that the U.S. was using to take down Assad. My point is this. We, operationally, went in to try to take down Assad in a regime change operation. I've shown evidence going all the way back for the last few years that reports that were being done, analysis that was being done on ISIS battlefield capability showed that their ability went far beyond just getting weapons off the battlefield, that these guys were using weapons and munitions that should have been well beyond their ability to get. And the thought was that the United States, including other like Saudi Arabia, Qatar, these forces, were assisting in getting these guys weapons. That turns out to be true. There's an interesting part to this, however, right here. Just to nail this down, I want to make sure I get it right. The coordination, let's start here, but I'm going to drop down really quickly. Timber Sycamore is the code name of a covert operation officially authorized by Obama in 2013 to train and equip anti-Assad rebellion. But what actually started in October 2011 when the CIA was operating via Britain's MI6 to avoid having to notify Congress that it was arming the rebels in Syria. Originally, the CIA and MI6 set up rebel arms supply networks from Syria, from Libya, a plan that involved Saudi, Qatari, and Turkish intelligence services. In 2012, probably in spring, Obama reluctantly signed a top-secret executive order of which little is known other than it authorized the CIA to provide quote-unquote non-lethal support to rebels in Syria. In concrete terms, then, what the CIA did was link up Qatari and Saudi allies with a number of arms manufacturers in Balkans. Bulgaria, Romania, Serbia, Croatia, with the backing of NATO, which controls arms exports from Balkans via URFOR, Qatari and Saudi Secret Service. Essentially, all of these secret services, Western and Middle Eastern, lined up literally in coordination to take down the Assad government, including illegal operations by France. He's French, to supply weapons to an area that was supposed to be blacklisted from the standpoint of weapons. It also proven that these armaments mostly went to equip jihadist groups, including terror militias, which proclaimed itself Islamic State in 2014. The coordination role that the agency signed off on in May and fall of 2011 is now proven fact. As we know, it was belatedly confirmed in 2018 by Ben Rhodes, Obama chief of staff, and he leads the citing document. Let me move further, right here. That is to say, the jihadist groups has been long described by Western government spokesmen as non-lethal support for so-called moderate rebels, yet the reality on the ground is that moderate rebel force that the Free Syrian Army has served as a pool of fighters, of weapons and ammunition for the anti-Assad jihadist nebula, whose tacticians and militiamen were much more effective than the FSA itself. As I explained in my book, the FSA has been dependent on jihadist groups first and foremost, al-Nusra Front, and vice versa. In January 2014, the first major fighting erupted between Daesh and other rebel groups, including al-Nusra Front. It must be emphasized that until the split in April 2013, al-Nusra Front and soon to be called Islamic State formed a single entity. More specifically, the founder of al-Nusra was sent to Syria in 2011 by the leader of the future Daesh, Abu Bakr al-Baghdadi, to fight Assad's troops. This guy that everybody thought was dead, that is sitting here, chubby and talking, older, was essentially part of the network that we ourselves were supporting in ISIS in order to take down Assad. We never learn. We never learn. And again, I'm not saying we as a collective, all of humanity. I'm saying we as in the 99%. When do we get tired of this? Understand, there are 359 people that are dead. This is called blowback. This is when we do something that has consequences that we don't necessarily foresee. The United States supporting troops or supporting the Mujahideen and Al-Qaeda, with this idea of radicalizing those troops in order to fight hard against the Russians, the groups eventually becoming Al-Qaeda. Even the smashing of Iraq and what came out of that, meaning ISIS. And then the supporting of those ISIS, because those are the guys who are fighting hardest against Assad, with a wink and a nod, knowing that the weapons and ammunitions of fighters are going to ISIS. We knew what was taking place. We were supporting terrorists in that region of the world. When Tulsi Gabbard came back to Jake Tapper and said, we need to stop supporting terrorists, Jake. They're head choppers. They're rapists. They're killers. And we're giving these guys weapons, money, ammunition. And we're allowing these guys because we think that they're a weapon to take down Assad. At a certain point, the United States and Western powers realized that they couldn't control these groups because in this one, they had this weird idea that they'll be able to control what happens after Assad leaves. Again, massively mistaken. Massively mistaken. Never goddamn learned. Over and over again. Think of how much money we're spending. We're spending like $1 trillion. They told us that the military, the campaign in Iraq was going to be like $200 some billion. We're like $7 to $8 trillion into that war. And based on what took place, hunting people down in caves, people who ultimately we should be building houses and giving bread to, we're bombing. And shocked as shit that the bombing is producing people who hate our guts. Hate our guts. We're spending trillions of dollars and creating our monsters. And shocked as shit that these guys hate our guts. I'm going to end this here, but what's important in this story is this guy claims credit for the Sri Lanka bombings. Whether or not it's true or not, who knows? He may want to gain relevance, especially after ISIS took the L that they've done in Syria, meaning they've lost all the territory. So this may be a cry for relevance. I don't necessarily know. I'm more interested, or the more interesting part of the story is that we were essentially funding and supporting this guy's network. This guy's network. He was a blunt instrument to try to take down Assad. All right, I'll end this because at this point, I feel like I'm just going to rant. And the story annoys the hell out of me. But I'll end it here. If you guys enjoy the content, please feel free to share, like, subscribe. You can always support the PayPal or Patreon. I have additional stories, so I'll see you guys in like 10, 15 minutes. Thanks all.